Welcome to the Aplusify's webinar on how to protect your organization from data phishing. I'm Vinu Deschetti, Director of Marketing and Sales at Aplusify. It is our pleasure to bring you educational webinars like this one. We love to share what we know and have learned, as well as learn a little something from you along the way. Neeraj Garg is our speaker today. As our COO, he leads a team of 200 developers with various levels of Salesforce certifications. He's created this internal task force that shares lessons learned and best practices that are shared and applied across our portfolio of nonprofits and associations. In today's webinar, Neeraj will be reviewing how data phishing works, what can happen if there is a phishing breach, and best practices to protect your Salesforce system. Neeraj, welcome. Before you begin, let's find out who we have with us. Let's take a couple of minutes to do a couple of polls. The first one, if you guys could just let us know what system you're using. If you're using Salesforce, Fontiva, or any other type of AMS. If you're using a different system that's not listed here, definitely put that into the chat section. We'd love to know what you're using. So Neeraj, in getting ready for this webinar, just the research around data phishing is really interesting. And it's interesting to see how prevalent it is. You know, some of the research that I've been looking at, and guys, I'll share this with you on the chat section here shortly, but I read somewhere that 32% of the breaches involve phishing. Can you talk a little bit about how prevalent data phishing is?
I think it's quite prevalent, and it has been, I think this phishing word originated in the year 1996 when in America, when some of the people started stealing financial data online for some banks, for some financial institutions. And since then, it's almost 25 years we have been hearing this word phishing because there is always something fishy about it. So it's very prevalent, and especially during these times where we are doing a lot of online stuff, everything is virtual, we are logging in through internet, we are doing all your transactions, there is no face-to-face interaction. So getting all this data phishing stuff is more relevant nowadays. And I think most of our clients that we are working with are quite aware about this and are actually asking like what they can do to secure this system from data phishing, because data phishing not only obviously loses your reputation, but I think it's more of protecting your users' data, because that is something that resides in your system and you should actually protect it very much. So I think data phishing is very prevalent, and there are some basic things which we can do, very simple steps to actually prevent ourselves, not fully, but at least to a level where we can actually stop all these phishing efforts. And that is what we are going to talk in this webinar today.
And, you know, and we did this poll question here about everybody just kind of rating how their security is currently with their AMS or CRM. And I'm not shocked. And I think, you know, there's the always ever-changing environment with cybersecurity. New threats come across. There's always new patches to be put. So I don't think that this is a surprising statistic. And I think it also hopefully will make you all realize that you're not alone. You know, I think a lot of us rely on whatever platform we're using to keep us safe with security patches and all of that. But there are additional things that Neeraj will talk today about what you can do to make sure that you're keeping your data safe. And I think also for those of you that don't know what your status is, Neeraj is going to give you some easy ways to check on that, how to check for that as well. One last question. Data phishing is a lot about getting those emails to security threats via email to your inbox. And that is a threat that goes specifically straight to your staff. And so love to hear about whether you feel as if your staff is aware of those threats and if you feel like there's enough training for them, because that's going to be a critical point. The one thing you can do is provide the training, but the other thing is to actually have your staff act on that training. Neeraj, do you want to talk a little bit about how data phishing is tricky in that sense, is that it sometimes cannot just be stopped at the doors, and it gets into the doors, it gets into the house, and it gets into people's email boxes?
Yeah, sure. And I can see from the survey that it's good to see that at least people are aware and they remind their users and staff to have a periodic check on the data phishing. So if you're doing that, that means you are actually aware about the threats of data phishing, because 67% have voted that they remind of the risks on a periodic basis, which is actually good. And that's actually good to know. But most of the times, right, even if you remind your staff or users about this periodic check about data phishing, still, if you don't have sufficient measures, you get into that trap, and then you realize what needs to be done. So I think it's better to follow some guidelines, maybe very simple, that maybe your Salesforce or any other Fontiva or any other AMS might be providing you. But the thing is that people are not aware about the security stuff that these tools are providing. And if you're not aware about what is out of the box features of all these tools that you're using, you actually don't use it. And when things go wrong, then we are actually in a hurry on what to do, what not to do. So what we will do in this webinar is maybe do preventive action on what can be avoided. And then maybe in subsequent webinars, we can actually talk about if after taking those preventive actions, something has happened, what needs to be done. So I think this webinar will be mostly about how to prevent that data phishing attack to happen in your organization, because that is the first step. Because after it is entered, then it's like a reputation loss for you, user data loss, a lot of stuff. So let's focus on how to prevent it, maybe in 5 simple steps or 6 simple steps, whatever it is.
Great. And as a reminder to everyone, while Neeraj is getting that screen up for us, if you have any questions, definitely chime in through chat. We're happy to address them as we go along.
Yep. So let's get started. So I think most of the people know what data phishing is, but just to quickly go through it, data phishing is actually an attack which hackers do on your users, right? So it's not an attack on the system, because they don't know what the credentials are about your system. This is more about a step back where they will actually target your users to get the data out of them, right? So it's a social engineering attack that they try to do. They try to lure your members or users so that they can actually automatically provide that information to them, which ultimately leads to the entry point for your organization as well. So I think we will take a very simple example. And most of the data phishing, 95% of the data phishing actually happens through mass email. So what a hacker will do, as you can see in the screen, right? What he will do is they will actually send a phishing email to all your members. And what that email will say is that your password is going to expire soon. And that is a very common and convincing email. And what they do is they generally send that email with logos of your company, which they might have copied from somewhere, so that the email looks realistic, right? So if you are an association, right, they will actually use your company logo and send that information to your users. So that, and since the users receive that email with a similar ID, right? So they will say, the site will say, so suppose your association name is American Doctors, right? So they will maybe tweak that name a bit and it will actually look like the real name. So your users will think like, yeah, they have got an email and their password is going to expire, because no one knows when their password are going to expire, because users don't know and no one wants their password to be expired because they cannot log into the system. So they will actually click on that link. And what will happen is, because it's a phishing email, right, that link actually takes them to a different website altogether, right, which would look very, very similar to your association website, because they have studied your association, they have studied your nonprofits, they have studied your website. They will try to copy that so that users don't are convinced that they've actually gone to the right site. And then obviously when you go to that site, it will ask you for your original password, right, before updating the password, as every website does. And as soon as you enter that original password, your password is hacked, right? And then they actually take you to the actual renewal page. And when you do that, all the information that is stored in that URL, which comes at the top of the browser bar, they steal that information and then they get access to your nonprofit or association's website. So it's a very simple trap where people get into. And I think there are some things which you can actually do where you say that your users should be trained that they don't get attracted to these emails. Or so what we will see in the next few slides would be how to actually stop these kind of phishing emails to happen, and how actually to prevent your users or members to actually not fall into this trap, because that is the most common trap. And this trap can have n number of versions. It can be renew your password, or it can be that your ID has expired, or your link will no longer work, so click on this link. So it's all that kind of luring stuff that they put it into it with some original logos and exact look and feel of your website. So it's
so Neeraj, I think at the very beginning when we got into this digital world, we were all very concerned about whether it was a secure site. You know, we were all looking at SSLs and did it have that little lock image in the URL?
Yeah.
And now that security is now taken to a whole new level into what we would think is daily activities, right? Updating member information, paying invoices online, all of that now is kind of threatened. So I think for organizations, since we are keeping that information on behalf of our donors or stakeholders, our members, it's really important that we as organizations really take that step to protect all of that. And this is just one of the cybersecurity threats that are out there.
That's true, Vinu. And I think obviously the repercussions for, so if someone actually has your username and password and is able to log into your website with your user ID and password, he has got all the information. And sometimes if you're a donor, right, you have got all these credit card information stored in your website. So you get into identity theft, they steal your information, they can use it somewhere else. They can use your credit cards if they're stored in that site. So it's a financial loss for you. And then if you're an association and your users realize that your sites or they have been hacked, right, they would just go and file a suit or a case against you, right? So it's a loss of brand name, it's a loss of trust, it's a hassle for you, for users, for members, everyone. And plus, people don't rely on the internet then, right? And especially in this world where everything is happening on internet, right? If you lose trust on internet, like how will things happen? And I've seen a lot of financial companies not putting in their data, or health companies putting in their data into the cloud. And that is because of all these data phishing threats or stuff, that the information about their users will just fall into wrong hands. And they can do anything about it because it's just the user name, ID, password, your name, first name, last name, or date of birth, which is actually used in a lot of other systems as well. Now, what we are going to talk to you about is what we think are the industry best practices to stop it. And you can actually prevent this things to happen if you are just aware about your tools, you are aware about how they actually help you in type of security. So these are some simple things that we can run into, and we can take all of these one by one. So let's start with, I'm not sure like how many people know that Salesforce actually provides you a facility where you can actually check your security health, right? So it's called a security health check. And if you're not aware about it, I think you can talk to your IT people or you can talk to your administrators to run this health check on your org or on your website, right? And what it does is it just runs a basic health checkup on some of the parameters, which can be like your minimum password length should be 8 characters. You cannot log in if you have entered password 3 times wrong, right? Or if you have got timeout, like if you have set the timeout of 30 minutes and people are logged out, you cannot log in back again unless you log in as another username and password. So if you see this screen, right, this is actually an actual screenshot from the health check, right? And what it does is, if you can see these numbers, so it says one is basically a drop down where you can actually select what kind of health check you want to do on which baseline. So you can select one of the options. Here we have selected Salesforce baseline standard. So we have selected this option. And to basically define, and once you run this health check, right, it gives you a list of errors that are there in your system. So it will say these are the high security risks, these are medium security risks, and you can actually go to this drop down, which is marked as number 2, and select your high risk security settings, medium risk. So here you can see that they have given a standard value in number 5. So that should be the value that Salesforce recommends you should have for that particular setting. And if you see value, your value, right? This is the value that you have put. So it says the standard value should be 0, but you have actually done a value of 58, which is why it's showing it as a critical error, because Salesforce thinks that this value should be close to 0. So what you can do is either go to number 6 option, where you can actually go to edit, and it will take you to that setting where you can actually set that value back to 0 or maybe closer to that, right? Or maybe you can go to option 7, where you say that fix risks button. You can click on that, and then what Salesforce does is it actually runs the tests and fix that risk automatically, right? So it basically tells you what is the security health of your system. It's very easy to run. You just have to select these options, click run, and you get this kind of report where you have all these errors. So it also says where you are compliant and where you are not compliant. And this is a very easy test to run, and every organization can run it. And then they score you based on, if your score is between 90 to 100, they rate you as excellent. So that means your security is up to date, and you need to do few changes. But if it is less than 75%, you seriously need to think about it and see what errors are there and ask your IT team to actually fix them, right? Because the more secure your system is, the least chances are there for the hackers or any other users to enter it and do all these kind of stuff.
So Neeraj, let me ask you, for this health check, how often do you recommend running this health check? Is it just once a year, or whenever there is a Salesforce release update? What's your recommendation?
Right. So I would not say once a year. I would generally say once a month, right? Because you generally get these security updates from Salesforce, and with every updates that you do on your org or your AMS, it's always good to run the security health check after that, because there will be certain settings that you might have changed while updating that version for the software. So it's always good to know like how the health check is based on the recent settings that you have done. But if not 1 month, I would generally suggest that maybe once in a quarter you should actually do it. And that should be a responsible, and you should make someone accountable for it. It's not that the whole IT team is responsible for it. There should be a designated person whom you say that this is my security guy and he is responsible for it. And he is going to give me a security report, maybe every month or maybe after 2 months, so that I know whether my system is secured or not. Most of the organizations we have seen fail to actually appoint someone to do this activity. And then it's a general activity that someone has to do. Like in the survey, we saw that people say that they remind people periodically, but there should be one person who should be reminded and who is the owner, and who should take that responsibility for the security of the system.
Neeraj, we have one question. Can you address, the question is, how do I find the Salesforce health check page? That's a mouthful.
Oh, okay. So what you do is you just go to the left-hand bar where it says search, and just type Salesforce health check, right? And it will take you to that option. You will get that option there. It's very simple.
I'll also place a link in the chat for you guys as well.
Yeah. So I think that is the first step you should do to know what are the vulnerabilities in your system. Because unless you run this health check, you will not know what needs to be improved, right? So this is the first step you should do. And then I think we talked about this in our last webinar as well, multi-factor authentication. So like this data phishing email I was talking about, where people target, so it's the same flow that you can see. So email sent by the attacker to target, he clicks that email link, he collects the credential data, and then he enters the organization website. Now, how do you stop that? So I will go to the second slide where it talks more about how we can stop that. So the first scenario that we talked about, data phishing, where email comes to the users. So what we could do is Salesforce actually provides something called Salesforce Authenticator mobile app. And you can actually go to App Exchange and download this app. This is for free. You just have to install it. And it's easy to integrate with your Salesforce system. So once you do that, what happens is, as soon as a user enters username and password, the app, since it is synced with your Salesforce org now, it actually sends you a notification on your mobile device. And why Salesforce has built this app? Because Salesforce thinks that email can be compromised, your text messages can be compromised. So they have built an app which resides on your mobile device, and everyone carries a mobile device nowadays. So it's with you all the time. So as soon as you log in, you get this notification on your phone. And as soon as you click on this notification, the Authenticator app gets enabled and it verifies, and you have to actually click and say that I am the user. Yes, I have logged into it. And it verifies your username and password. So what you have done is, though you have entered the username and password in your website, but there is another level of authentication that you have put in through the Salesforce mobile app, which is authenticating you. And since your mobile is with you, the hacker cannot hack it, right? So you have to make sure, obviously, your mobile is protected. You have a password to open it, but it puts an extra level of authentication on the username and password, because you are getting a notification on your mobile phone. So it's a multi-factor authentication that you have put in and stopped your hacker to hack your information, because he does not know what has come in your mobile. So I think that is something that you can do, and that is something you can ask all your users to do it, because it's easy to use, it's free, so you don't have to do much. It's more about making your users aware about it and integrating this mobile app with your Salesforce org. I think if you do that, 50% of your issues will be resolved immediately, especially about these data phishing emails.
Neeraj, while you're on this slide about MFA, there is a question about whether you recommend multi-authentication for all users.
Yes, I recommend multi Salesforce Authenticator mobile app for every user, right? It's more or like when you do a banking transaction, right? So you log in into your username and password, you enter it, but there is a one-time password that comes on your mobile before doing the transaction, right? So unless, even if someone hacks your user ID and password, but he does not know the one-time password that has been sent to you, your transaction will not be done, right? So it's similar to that. Even if someone hacks your user ID and password, but still, since you have enabled this Salesforce Authenticator mobile app, unless you authenticate yourselves on your mobile, it will not log you in, right? So I recommend it 100% for everyone. And it's easy to use because you don't have to pay anything for it. It's more about integrating it. And it integrates very well because it's a Salesforce app. You're using Salesforce, it integrates very well with Salesforce. It's a matter of just being aware about it and creating that awareness among the users and among your team. So 100% recommended.
And I can't imagine that our donors and members would object to keeping their data safe. So I'm sure as long as you communicate it out and explain that it's for their best interests, I'm sure they're going to be very receptive.
Yes, I think so. Because everyone cares about their data, everyone cares about their financial security. So it should not be a problem. Then I think second is about, which you might have heard, about the single sign-on. Because what happens is when you're using your systems, it's not just one system that you're using. So maybe you may be using Salesforce as your CRM, which is tied in with your AMS. It can be Salsa, it can be Nimble, it can be Fontiva, right? And then within that AMS as well, you have a lot of apps. You can have an event app to log in. You might have other systems which you might have integrated with Salesforce, maybe your financial system, invoicing systems. So when it is like a lot of systems that you're working with, right? And a user has to log in and do multiple user ID and passwords for each of the application he's using in, right? It creates a hassle for him, right? Plus, people are not in a habit of putting in good passwords, right? So you may have, they generally try to keep a password that is easy to remember, right? So if they have to remember like 8 passwords, 7 passwords, they're not going to apply their mind and say that, oh, I will fall into a data phishing trap, so I should have 8 different passwords, and that should be very hard to remember, right? They will never do that. Okay.
So password 1, 2, 3, 4 is not a good idea.
Password 1. So they will have password 1, 2, 3, 4 for system 1, password 5, 6, 7, 8 for system 2, right? Or maybe date of birth with their incremental numbers. That is how we have seen the users, because, and we cannot blame them, right? Because
it's human nature.
Remembering, right? It's human nature, right? There are so many systems, and if they are using 3 or 4, right? They are using Fontiva, they are using Salesforce, they are using Fontiva events, they are using Salsa Engage app, right? They can't just remember the password. So it's always good to have a single sign-on implemented. So what is single sign-on? It's like a mechanism which you can do where you give a username. So you integrate all these systems and you implement a single sign-on where there is one user ID and password for all the systems. So if a user has logged into Salesforce, then he does not need to enter a separate password to go into Fontiva or a separate password to go into any of the invoicing app, right? So what happens is it helps you from an organization perspective, because you are reducing the complexity of your systems, right? You don't have to maintain n number of passwords. And if a user has just one password, you can actually guide him and tell him and convince him to keep that password as per your policies, right? And it's easy for him. So it saves you time. And then even if you are adding more apps to your system or more systems to your overall organization, you don't have to enter another user ID and password. It's just seamlessly integrated. So it's easy to use. So I would seriously recommend that if you have multiple systems in your organization, it's worth investing time and money in implementing single sign-on, right? Which actually helps you to save time, helps your users to maybe better keep their password, maybe improve their password habits, and enhances your security coverage, right? And it's very logical, right?
Neeraj, we have, oh, I apologize. Go ahead.
Yes, no, that's fine.
Okay, we have 2 questions I want to make sure we get to, and this is all about SSO, so it's very relevant to right now. Do you recommend a business password manager for employees to log into sites that are not SSO compliant?
I would not recommend that, right? Obviously, because again, same things, right? If you are logging into a non SSO site, it's not secured, right? Plus, you'd never know like who is monitoring your system and who can hack it. Right? But if you've got a single sign-on implemented, it's obvious and it's easy to track, right? It's even if you are tracking. So if something bad happens, right, or if there is a mess and you have a hack, since you have got a single sign-on, it would be easy to understand that behavior on the flow of how the hacker actually proceeded through a single sign-on. Whether if you have multiple passwords, you never know what was the entry point and what was the exit point. So because with single sign-on, you have one entry point and one exit point, so it would be easy to even catch a hacker.
Yeah. The next question that we have is, if we use single sign-on settings, is there a way to know who is making the changes to the data, or will all the changes be generic?
Yes, we can do that. That is what I said, right? If you are using single sign-on, right, you can actually know, and you can keep audit, right? Because if user X has logged into the system, that same password and ID would be reflected into all the systems that he has logged in, because he does not have to enter a new user login and ID and password. So whatever activity that is happening with one ID and password, and it's easy to go to the backend and trace that activity very easily for that particular user. So that is why it saves time, and it's like one click to share and access maybe all reports and everything. So obviously it's very easy.
Neeraj, so I would assume that if you've got several different integrations into Salesforce and you do SSO, and it's also important to make sure that the way the data is synced, whether it's one-way or two-way synced, that all of that is taken care of in conjunction with setting up an SSO, that that thought process of trying to come up with the game plan for implementing SSO is kind of, there's a plan for it and how that data gets synced and how those changes are implemented.
That's true, right? Right. So it gives you that vision where you know that it's one system, right? And for that one system, we have got one user ID and password. So all those systems are not running in silo. We have got that integrated, or at least logging in, right? And they are working in conjunction.
So SSO is just not something you can press a button and say, okay, we've got SSO. There needs to be a little bit more planning involved.
No, I think it's a bit of more planning involved, because you need to actually integrate all these systems, because every system is different and has a different system of login. So it's more about getting all the stakeholders or maybe owners of different systems to get together and understand what the login process is, and then maybe come up with a plan on how to actually implement that.
That's a whole nother webinar.
Yeah, that's another webinar. But I think if people are aware about it, that it should be done and how it saves time, then maybe at least they can take that step to move forward, or maybe put it in a plan somewhere when they are planning their roadmap, that maybe in the next quarter we will do it, or this year we have a plan to implement it, and keep that budget aside for it. So here I will talk about some of the simple settings that you can do, which actually you can do in your org, which reduces the chances of threat attacks or data phishing attacks on your website or on your Salesforce org or on your AMS system, right? So as you know, like every request comes from a IP, right? So there are different millions of IPs that are floating around from where the hackers log in. So it's always good to put a restriction check on the number of IPs. So you say that only IPs from X range to Y range are permissible to enter the website. Any request that comes from a different IP or which is not in that range will not be entertained. Right? So what you are doing is actually restricting the access for the IPs. So you are restricting the hackers. So if there are like 100 hackers, you are actually restricting at least 1995, right? So you are just left with 5% hackers. Okay, so that is, and I think if you're not aware about how to do the IP restriction setting, you can talk to your security guy or someone in the IT team, and he can actually do it for it. It's generally the system administrator or your security person who actually knows about these settings. It's easy to do. Then another is enable HSTS. So HSTS is where if you are entering a website and your user says HTTP, right? But you already have a secured website which is called HTTPS, right, with a security certificate. So if you enable this setting, it automatically redirects your users to the secured site, right? So they don't have to do anything they type for your website name, it will automatically redirect them to the secured website. So you know that this is a secured website with a HTTPS and it's secured. You've got a security certificate. So it's just a setting that you have to do in. You can see that in the screen, right, where it says enable HSTS for all sites and communities with the default force.com subdomain. So you just have to enable that button, and it's a simple setting. That actually comes in your Salesforce health checkup as well once you run that test. Then obviously, since you have got different websites that you have built on top of your organization, there may be different community portals that you have built. So it's always good to warn your users before they get redirected out of your main Salesforce, right? So that they know that they are no more in Salesforce and they are getting redirected to a different site so that they're aware, right? It just gives them that feeling that they're not in Salesforce and what they're accessing might be something which is not bound by security rules of Salesforce or your org. So it's always good to give them this option. And again, you have to just click that settings. And even if you are redirecting them out of Salesforce, you should actually list the website names or the URLs where you want to redirect them to, right? Because there may be just 5 URLs which you want them to redirect to. So you should add all those URLs as trusted URLs in your system, as you can see, right? So if you click this option on the left-hand side, trusted URLs for redirects, you can actually enter the list of, so maybe you can say, I want to go to www.association.org, whatever your association name is. It can be redirected to that because I trust that website. So you can post all your trusted websites. So what will happen is if that website is not put as a trusted website in your settings here, right, it will not go to that website. So it's an extra check that you can do. And especially for all these emails that they get where they get redirected to the hacker's website. So if that is not a trusted URL that you have put here, you will actually prevent your users from going there. So these are all preventive measures that you can do, and these are small things that can be taken care of by your administrator, Salesforce administrator, or by your IT team, or by your security team. But as I said, and I want to repeat that you should actually appoint a security person who is responsible for taking care of all these things. These are small things, but get missed. So get a checklist prepared and make sure that it has been implemented. And then the Salesforce health check has been run and you are not getting all these issues. Any questions, Vinu, or should I move forward?
No, keep going.
Okay. Next, what we generally recommend to all our customers, if they can, is maybe obviously Salesforce provides some kind of settings or your org provides some kind of basic settings that it does. But if you really want to enhance your settings, you should use some kind of security tools that are in place. So example, if you're using Salesforce, Salesforce provides something called Salesforce Shield, which is actually a security tool provided by Salesforce. Now, what it does is it actually keeps running and monitors all the events that are happening in your org, keeps a check of all the audit trails that you were talking about. That if you want to see if you want to see what suspicious activity is going in your system, you can just go to these audit trails. You can see who has changed what, how he has changed, and you can get that data for the last 10 years if you are using Salesforce Shield. So Salesforce Shield can provide you data for the last 10 years if you want to. Then what it also does is it provides you encryption, right? So suppose in the database that in the Salesforce database, you are storing user information, which is like first name, last name, date of birth, his phone number, his address, right? Now, they just lie as a plain text in a database. And if someone gets access to it, you can actually get that information very easily. Now, if you're using a security tool like Salesforce Shield, what it does is it actually provides you an encryption on all those kind of fields. So they would be encrypted in a different format, which can only be decrypted by a specific algorithm. So your first name would be stored in an encrypted format, which is not readable. And even if someone gets access to your database information, he cannot decrypt it, right? So Salesforce Shield just not only provides this encryption on a field level, but at a platform level where all your, so you may have certain reports or certain records of your customers, which you have put in a separate folder somewhere in Salesforce. Now, what it does is actually encrypts your files with some kind of key. So even if someone gets access to that file, unless he knows that key, he cannot open that file. And your user information cannot be read by anyone else. So we always recommend that people use these kind of tools, which are obviously they come at a cost, but I think the cost is justified based on the type of security policies that they provide, because I think there is nothing compared to the cost of the data that you have or a cost of a hack that is there in your system. So I think if you have that kind of budget and you can do it, I would always recommend. And Salesforce Shield is not one of the tools. There are a number of tools that are available in the market that you can use. You can evaluate it. You can ask your IT team to do that, and maybe you can hire an external security consultant to do that. We do often a lot about it with all our customers. So we recommend them different options for their security, depending on the type of organization or depending on the type of data that they're holding.
So it's a matter of difference of prevention versus reaction to an attack. So doing whatever you can, spending that budget, it's insurance. It's almost like insurance money where you.
Yeah, correct. How much money you want to spend on the insurance?
Yeah, and also so it's also our own commitment that we want to give the reassurance to our donors and members, saying that we're doing what we can, all that we can to protect your data that we keep. So
that is true. So it's more of a data insurance that we have. So, and it's more of a trust that you develop with your users. So maybe if you are talking to your users and you are telling them about the type of tools that you're using for security, especially in these times, it develops that level of trust. Yeah, my system is secured and my data is secured. So maybe I will go with this option. So it's a matter of trust, making your system more secure, putting in more walls into your system. So yeah, but if you really want to do it, it needs to be planned. It needs to be thought of. It needs to be searched for. So it's not that you just implement any tool. Try to implement a tool that actually suits your purpose. And I think last but not the least, that is the most important, train users on security. Because see, the kind of users that you have in your system, he can be a sales guy, he might be a customer servicing guy, he might be your member. And these guys are not so concerned about data phishing, right? So they say like we have to do our job. What the hell we have to do with data phishing? It's not our responsibility. It's someone that IT team has to look into, or it's something that other teams have to look into. So it's more of a cultural change that we have to bring in the organization, where we stress not just once, but in a continuous fashion, because uh, people forget if you just do these kind of trainings on an induction basis, right? They have to be reciprocated every month, every 15 days, every 2 months, that this is what can happen, right? So I think it's better to tell them if they just enter a weak password, how their system is more vulnerable or their account is more vulnerable for a hacker to hack in, right? Because people don't understand why they should keep a strong password. Why not just a password which they can remember? So I think you need to train them to follow the password policy, right? Maybe have a kind of session with them and then take a small quiz with them to understand what they've understood, all right? And then maybe provide that kind of readiness for them, where they know what is a data phishing email, how does that happen. Maybe show them an example of a data phishing email that might have happened in your organization, or maybe someone has got it. Because people visualize more, and if they can see that kind of example that has happened with someone, they can actually come to your ID department and say, oh, this is a phishing email I have got, right? And then maybe you can show it to the other users so that they know like they can get similar emails. But it's more about telling them rather than ignoring it. Most of the times we have seen that people just ignore it. It's a phishing email, or I find it fishy, just delete it, right? It should be reciprocated, it should be translated, and it should be told to everyone.
And I think some of that it can be done. I think staff can go through more of that quizzing exercise where you're communicating them on a regular basis and giving them guides and kind of institutionalizing the whole security process. With members and donors, I've seen it where that training has happened through the journey, that online journey of when they're creating their password and maybe mentioning at the bottom not only what is required of that password, but why it's important. And it doesn't have to be a long document. It could just be, it could reiterate your commitment to keeping their information safe. Also, I've seen where organizations have sent out, once someone has joined an organization or registered for an event, set the expectation of, these are the type of emails that you will get from us. We will never send you an email to reset your password, or under a different name, or just set the expectations with your key stakeholders of how you're going to communicate with them, what you can expect, just so that they know what a data phishing might, if it comes in and it's not real. I know in the meetings world, it's very notorious when we were all traveling and making hotel reservations. There used to be data phishing attacks about wrong hotel information, getting people to cancel their hotel reservations and booking them with a fake reservation company. That's a very common thing that happens in the meetings world. And so so a lot of organizations will communicate, if you're going to get information about housing, you will only get it from this email address, just kind of reiterating some of those security things. But there's definitely a communication plan that you can implement to enhance what you're doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think most of the times it's that people are not aware about how they can protect themselves from all these kind of stuff, because they're not trained enough for doing that. They might have heard these words, data phishing, but how do they actually prevent it, and are they actually ready for managing it? That is something which we don't tell.
That's
And
in the industry.
yes, it's across the industry, right? And that is why I stress a lot that there should be a separate person who is there in charge for your security, who is actually qualified for this job, who actually knows all these kind of phishing attacks, who can actually train the users, who knows what to do best in terms of security. Many companies obviously have a separate security team in place, but everyone cannot afford that. But at least they can actually appoint a small team or a right person to manage it. Because if that is not managed well, I think it creates a lot of problem.
I think in the
And
news, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Neeraj.
no, that's fine.
No, I was just in preparing for this webinar, doing some research about associations and nonprofits who've had data security breaches specifically to data phishing. It's very limited. People don't, that's not a matter of pride that you want to have out there that you've had a breach and how someone was able to get into your systems. It's not something, a case study that you necessarily want to write for your own organization, and hence not a lot of information out there about how it's specifically affecting our industries. But there is a lot of information out there, and with some of the bigger corporate brands, they're more required to get that information out, and it's impacting people. You see brands like Apple and Netflix, and you see these data, and there are lessons to be learned. They may not be nonprofits and associations, but there are definitely lessons to be learned about how easily a breach can happen and the steps that those organizations are taking to make it right, whether it's prevention or even post-attack. So definitely don't just dismiss the information you may see out there about big companies.
Right, that's true. And I think with all these GDPR guidelines in place where users can actually sue you in court if they find that the data breach has happened. So I think it's important that we protect our systems from all these kind of threats. And it actually is more about training the users on how to put it. Maybe I have seen a lot of organizations where they actually grant user permissions, like an administrator permissions for a lot of stuff, right? So we had this client where everyone was an administrator. So everyone had this right to do anything in the system, right? They can go and change the settings whenever they want, and you exactly don't know like who has done what, and then no one takes the responsibility. So I think the first thing that we did was stopped all those user permissions and make it to one person the admin, and then a user role where user has limited permissions to see what is happening. But since the people are not aware about how these user permissions can affect a system, they don't know how to set it, because it's a task in itself, right? How to set user permissions, and unless people know the importance of it, they don't do that. So I think if we can restrict the access so it should be limited access. People should have access to things that they should have access to. So they should have limited access to everything, right? If they require it, there should be a proper approval process that should happen. It's not like you approach the IT guy and you say that I need this access and he just grants it. There should be a proper process where you report to your manager approves it, or your senior manager approves it, and then you get that level of access for what you are doing.
Right? And accountability, right? Like that.
Yes.
Now there is that responsibility is connected to what could happen.
Right. Correct. Right.
Now, Neeraj, before you close out this this webinar, I just wanted to mention to everyone, we still do have a few more minutes. We've got another slide to review, but if you do have any questions, definitely put that in the chat section and we're happy to address those. But go ahead, Neeraj. Give us what your recommendations are.
Yeah, I think these are my recommendations, which we have already talked about. Obviously, first of the recommendation would be to create that security awareness in your organization that we have talked about. Always nominate a security person. That is always my take, that there should be someone accountable for your security, because he's the gatekeeper who is going to stop all these things from happening in your organization. So he's the most important person. Run periodic health checks that we've talked about. Keep yourself informed about any updates, security updates that Salesforce is providing or Fontiva is providing. And they provide the security updates in, I think, at least 2 of the releases that happen in a year. So for that to understand, you should again have a security person in place who actually knows what those updates are and can fill you in on what would happen, analyze it, and tell you like, we should update this, we should not update this because this is relevant, this is not relevant. And obviously, last not the least, use security tools if you can for continuous monitoring of your system. And all these things that we have talked about, it's a continuous process that should happen. It's not just one time that activity that you should be doing. It's a continuous activity, and a continuous activity can only happen if you have a continuous team who is looking after all these things. You cannot expect your IT team to look at into once. You should have a continuous process, someone continuously monitoring it and planning it for your organization. Yeah, I think so. So if we can take off these small steps, I think our system would be much more secured. And obviously, all of these things, some are long-term, some are short-term, but if we can maybe grab all those low-hanging fruits, which we can right now, maybe that would actually help you in the longer run.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's see if you have any, definitely let us know if you have any questions. You know, Barbara, yes, it is exhausting, but it is very important. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today's webinar. Thank you, Neeraj, for imparting so much knowledge. I know there's so much more we can talk about. Again, this has been a webinar about Defend Against Data Phishing. Please definitely join us for our next webinar. We love doing webinars, sharing this information. Our next webinar is really targeted to those that are financially responsible for maintaining your Salesforce or your AMS environment. What are the actual financial costs of having staff actually maintain that? If you don't have staff that's quite technically skilled for that, what might those costs be if you outsource them? And then what might be the cost benefit analysis if you were to bring in someone like Aplusify to come in and help you be more efficient with some of the things that you need done within your AMS. But it's going to be a workshop, so I'll put you to work in that session. So definitely join us on December 15th. If you have any questions, definitely I'm putting up our contact information here. You can reach us by phone or email. Ping us if you want more information about security, about cybersecurity and data phishing. We'll be sending more resources to you in the email with the recording, but also we're happy to meet with you one-on-one to talk about your specific needs and how some things that you might be able to do, or maybe even how we might be able to help you with that. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Neeraj, for your information today. Have a great holiday month, and have a great new year. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you.